My name is Thelma Caldwell. I'm 67 years old. And if you're imagining the kind of grandmother who knits on the porch, serves cookies at church, and smiles quietly through life, you're only half right. Yes, I bake. Yes, I tend my roses. But I've also buried a husband, raised 3 kids through a recession, a war, and the kind of heartbreak that splits a mother's soul. And still, I showed up every day. I wasn't born strong, I became strong. After I lost my husband, there was no one else to carry the weight, so I did. I went to parent-teacher meetings alone, sat through teenage tantrums and school expulsions, and I worked 2 jobs, one for the bills, one for the hope that maybe one day all of it would be worth it. I never complained, I never asked for praise, and I certainly never asked to be called an embarrassment by my own daughter-in-law. But that's exactly what happened. At my grandson Elliot's Harvard Law graduation dinner with over 200 guests in tuxedos and gowns, Esme stood up, pointed at me, and said I was disgusting. I didn't flinch. Because you see, when you've walked through fire and made it out alive, you don't fear the spark. People mistake quiet women like me for harmless. They think if we don't speak, we don't see. But we see everything. I saw the cracks in Esme's perfect smile long before anyone else did. I felt the tension in every cold hug, every cutting glance, every backhanded compliment she threw across the dinner table like it was nothing. But I stayed silent for my son, for my grandson, for the peace of the family. Until silence was no longer an act of grace, but one of betrayal. So yes, I'm Thelma Caldwell, and this is not a story about revenge. It's a story about truth, about what happens when a quiet woman decides to finally speak. And once I did, no lie could survive what came next. They say the worst wars are the ones fought without a single word. And that's exactly what it was between me and Esme. Not screaming, not slamming doors, not drama that spills into family group chats. No, Esme was far more elegant than that. Her weapon of choice? Silence, timing, precision. For 15 years, she played the long game. With every backhanded compliment, every time she forgot to save me a seat at the table. Every time she introduced me as David's mother, never as mom. In public, she wore the perfect mask, polished, poised, pleasant. But in private, she cut deep in ways only women know how to wound each other. A look, a tone, a raised eyebrow that said more than words ever could. She'd rearrange the seating chart at birthday dinners to put me at the end. She'd accidentally schedule Elliot's recitals on days she knew I had work. And when I arrived breathless and late, she'd flash that fake smile and say, "Oh, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd bother." Every insult was sugar-coated, every dismissal wrapped in velvet. So no one else saw it, but I felt it over and over again. And the hardest part, David never noticed. Or maybe he did and just didn't want to admit it. He loved her, and I loved him. So I stayed silent. Year after year, smile after forced smile, until that night, when her war became public. When the gloves came off, when she finally said aloud what she'd only whispered with her eyes for over a decade, "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you." And just like that, I stopped pretending. If you asked me what pride felt like, I'd say that night, that single night when everything finally felt like it had been worth it. My grandson Elliot had just graduated Harvard Law on a full scholarship. He walked across that stage like he was born for it. Sharp navy suit, eyes gleaming, back straight, head high. He had become everything I'd prayed for, everything I'd worked for, every shift I pulled. Every night I stayed up grading essays with a sleeping baby beside me. Every time I bit my tongue for the sake of family peace. It all led to this one moment. That night at the Riverside Country Club was supposed to be our celebration. White linen tables, crystal glasses, floral centerpieces, and proud faces all around. And right there at the head of our table sat Elliot, beaming, confident, grateful. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Grandma Thelma, did you see Professor Morrison's face during my speech? I think I actually made him tear up." I smiled. My eyes did tear up. "You've always had a gift with words, sweetheart," I said. "Your grandfather would have been so proud." And I meant every word. But before the pride could even settle in my chest, before I could even toast to the future, the temperature in the room changed, like someone opened a door and let winter inside. And just like that, Esme stood up. The Riverside Country Club had never looked more breathtaking. Golden chandeliers hung like stars overhead, casting soft light across white linen tables set with crystal stemware and polished silver. The sound of gentle laughter echoed like music between marble columns and tall windows draped in velvet. Even the air smelled expensive: roses, vanilla, and aged wine. Waiters moved like dancers, elegant, smooth, invisible, refilling glasses and clearing plates with the precision of a Broadway production. And at every table, people were smiling, clinking glasses, leaning in to whisper congratulations. To Elliot, Harvard Law, and you believe it? That boy's going places, just like his grandfather. I sat in my navy dress, the same shade as Elliot's suit, not expensive, but well-fitted, timeless, quiet, me. I watched my grandson, his posture confident, his face glowing. Every now and then, he'd flash me a look across the table, the kind that says, "We made it, Grandma, we did it." And we had. For one brief moment, everything shimmered with meaning. Everything felt right. I thought, this is the night we'll always remember. But what I didn't know is that it would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. It happened in a breath. No warning, no signal, no cue from the universe. Esme stood up. Her chair scraped sharply against the polished floor, slicing through the room's warm laughter like a blade through silk. Her wineglass trembled in her hand, half full, clutched like a weapon. And then, with every eye turning toward her, with waiters freezing mid-step, with Elliot's smile fading into confusion, she looked directly at me and spat the words like venom. "You embarrass me. I'm disgusted by you." The room went dead silent. No clinks, no chatter. Even the music seemed to pause mid-piano note. I didn't move. Not a blink, not a twitch. Just stillness. I had known this moment might come, but not like this, not in front of Elliot, not here. But Esme, she had made her choice, and she wasn't done. She turned to the crowd now, to the other guests, to the elegant pearl-wearing women and the men in tailored suits. Her voice rose. "This woman has been a burden on our family for years, always saying the wrong thing. Always dressing like she shops at a thrift store. She doesn't belong here, not in this room, not in this family." The words hit like punches, not because they were true, but because they were said to destroy, not correct. I could feel my son David stiffen beside her. Elliot's jaw was clenched, but still no one stopped her, and maybe that's what hurt most. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's sharp, heavy, crackling with the sound of people not knowing what to do. That's what filled the room after Esme's outburst. The kind of silence where even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. I could feel dozens of eyes landing on me, some wide with shock, others pretending not to look, but leaning closer anyway. I didn't move. But Elliot, he didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just sat there, motionless, like the ground had dropped beneath him. My grandson, who had just given a speech about family legacy and love, now sat pale-faced, staring at his mother, like she'd morphed into a stranger in front of him. His voice, once so bold in the auditorium, was now completely gone. And David, my son, he looked like a man being pulled in two directions. His mouth opened, then closed again. His hands rested on the table, tense, as if weighing whether to defend his wife or protect his mother. But he said nothing. Nothing at all. He just sat there, frozen, like the rest of them. And in that moment, I realized something painful. This family had no script for confrontation, only silence, only swallowing pain with smiles and wine. But I was done with that. So I reached into my purse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my napkin. I didn't even blink. Instead, I reached into my purse and gave a simple wave to Marcus the waiter, who's known me for 10 years. He nodded, calmly walked to the panel near the bar, pressed a button, and just like that, the screen behind the head table flickered to life. The country club usually used it to display weekly menus, wedding slideshows, or golf tournament schedules. But tonight, it showed Esme, clear as day, in a lawyer's office, timestamp 6 months ago. Her hair was tied back, her voice was sharp, her face cold. "So," the lawyer asked, "you want to completely sever all ties?" "Yes," Esme replied flatly. "I don't want her to have any legal claim to contact or visitation." "Just to be clear," the lawyer continued, "you're referring to Madison Phillips?" Esme didn't hesitate. "As far as I'm concerned, I never had a daughter." Gasps rippled across the room, but the next line was the knife. "And what should we say if she ever tries to contact you?" Esme leaned in, her eyes cold, her voice steady. "Tell her I'm dead." The words echoed cruel, final, horrifying. The room exploded in whispers. Someone dropped a fork. Someone else gasped out loud. "Esme?" She stumbled, her face drained of all color. Her body swayed, then collapsed into the chair behind her and slowly folded forward face down on the tablecloth, unconscious. When Esme collapsed, the room split in two. Half of the guests shot up from their chairs in alarm. The other half froze still, processing the words that had just echoed through the speakers. "Tell her I'm dead." The video stopped, but the damage didn't. Chandeliers trembled from the movement below. A fork clattered onto the floor. Wine spilled. Heels clicked backward. And someone screamed. Not in pain, but in realization. The kind of scream that comes not from fear, but from witnessing something so cruel that it rattles the spine. Elliot was still sitting, his body upright, but his soul clearly somewhere else. His mouth was slightly open, as if about to say something, but words never came. He looked like he was watching his world fracture slowly, deliberately, right in front of him. David, his father, stood up at last, but not to protect Esme, not to yell, not to defend. He just stood there, hand to his mouth, eyes wide, and whispered so soft it was barely a breath. "Madison." That name hit the room like a second explosion. People gasped again. Who's Madison? What does she have to do with Esme? Did Esme really abandon her own child? The questions swirled like storm clouds, but Thelma already knew the answers. She didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She just sat there, calm, unshaken, because she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. It started with silence. Not a scream, not a fight, just silence. The kind that creeps into a house and stays there. It hides in the pauses between dinner conversations, in the fake smiles at family brunch, in the way Esme would always praise Thelma in front of others, but never once made eye contact when no one was watching. And Thelma noticed. She always noticed. There was a moment, a very specific one, that stuck in Thelma's mind like a thorn. It was Christmas Eve 5 years ago. Esme had dropped a glass. It shattered on the kitchen tile. Madison, barely a teen, reached out to help sweep it up. And Esme, she slapped her hand away. "Don't touch that," she hissed. "It's not your place." That sentence didn't match the tone. Thelma saw something in Esme's face that night. Something cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from stress. No, this was a cold that came from contempt. So Thelma did what no one expected from a gentle old grandmother. She called in a favor, an old acquaintance. A man who used to serve in missing persons and now worked freelance, Raymond Knox. Private investigator. She handed him a single photo and one sentence. "This is my daughter-in-law. I want to know who she was before she became Esme Phillips." Raymond looked her in the eye and asked, "How far do you want me to go?" Thelma answered without blinking, "As far as the lies go." And from that moment on, the clock started ticking on Esme's secret life. Raymond wasn't a man easily shaken. He'd seen too much in his years. Runaways, fake identities, even parents who walked out and never looked back. But this case hit different. It took him 3 weeks to untangle the paperwork. Esme's name wasn't always Esme Phillips. She used to be Claire Madison Blake. The files were scrubbed clean, birth records sealed, social media non-existent. But Raymond didn't stop there. He dug into medical records, school registrations, and then he found a name. Madison Blake, age 21, born to Claire Madison Blake, no father listed. Last known guardian, foster care state placement. But the note on the file, that's what made Raymond call Thelma at 3:17 a.m. He didn't even say hello. "You need to sit down," he said. Thelma sat on the edge of her bed trembling. Raymond took a breath, then read it word for word. At age 15, the minor was surrendered by the biological mother to avoid legal and financial responsibility. Statement by mother: "If she ever tries to find me, tell her I'm dead." Silence. Raymond's voice dropped to a whisper. She gave up her own daughter like garbage? Thelma didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't say a word. But in that moment, something in her changed. She didn't just suspect anymore. She knew. Esme wasn't broken. She was cruel, calculated, and unforgivable. Raymond didn't just bring back stories. He brought documents, real ones, stamped, signed, filed at the county courthouse 15 years ago. Thelma sat at her kitchen table, fingers trembling as she unfolded each sheet. They were cold, clinical, but they bled more than any confession. Document number 1, voluntary termination of parental rights, minor Madison Blake. Reason: unable and unwilling to provide continued support. Document number 2, financial waiver agreement. Clause: biological parent absolves all responsibility, no future child support, no visitation, no contact permitted. Document number 3, a notarized statement by Esme, then Claire Blake. This child does not concern me. I choose not to be contacted. If she ever asks for me, tell her her mother died years ago. Thelma didn't need to read the rest. It was already burned into her soul. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip in judgment. It was a decision, cold, signed in ink, stamped by law, and delivered like a final nail into a coffin. Esme didn't just walk away. She vanished, intentionally, legally, completely, and she'd hoped no one would ever know. Her name is Madison Blake. She's 21, she lives in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and she never sleeps through the night, because from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., she works as a night security guard for a parking structure downtown. And at 8:30 a.m., she takes the bus to community college, where she studies criminal justice. She wants to become an investigator, like the kind who finds people. Like the kind who might have found her mother if anyone had ever tried. She's quiet, polite, she keeps her head down, never causes trouble. But ask any professor, they'll tell you, she's always the first to show up and the last to leave. They call her the girl with fire behind her eyes. But she doesn't see that fire. She only sees the void, that quiet hole in her chest where the word mom should live, because she's never known what it feels like to have a parent. No bedtime hugs, no birthday candles, no one to call when her stomach aches at 2 a.m., no one to ask what kind of person she should grow up to be. All Madison ever had was a false hope, a soft lie she told herself on the hardest nights. Maybe she didn't want to leave. Maybe something bad happened. Maybe she still loves me. Maybe she'll come back. She didn't, because Madison wasn't lost. She was discarded, erased from a story she never got to finish. Deleted from the life her mother rebuilt without her, just because she didn't fit the new version of perfect. Esme wasn't unconscious for long. 10 minutes after she collapsed, she opened her eyes and realized her perfect image had just been shattered in front of 200 people. The mask had cracked. The room had seen. Now there was only one thing left to do: rewrite the story before anyone else could. Still pale and trembling, she slipped into the coat room with her phone and started dialing. Call number 1 to her daughter Sarah. Sweetheart, don't believe what you heard. It's all a misunderstanding. Your grandma's always hated me. She's jealous of how much your father loves me. Call number 2 to her husband David. Baby, please, don't let her twist everything. That video, it's fake or taken out of context. I was pressured. I was young. Call number 3 to Elliot, her son. I love you more than life. You know that, right? You're everything to me. Don't let one moment ruin our bond. Call #4, #5, #6. Anyone who had ever believed her, anyone who might still believe her. And every single time, her voice sounded sweeter, her tone more fragile, her words rehearsed, but trembling. She wasn't explaining. She was cleaning up a crime scene, a PR crisis, a social death spiral. And in her twisted mind, she believed, if I move fast enough, if I cry hard enough, if I gaslight deep enough, I can erase the truth again. But what Esme didn't know was that someone else had already started telling the truth. Truth doesn't always win first. Sometimes the louder voice wins, the one who cries first, the one who plays the victim faster. That night, the whispers didn't start with Esme. They started about Thelma. At the far end of the room, Sarah stood with her arms crossed, eyes narrowed, confused, protective, angry. Why would Grandma do this? Why would she ambush Mom like that? And at Elliot's graduation, that's cruel. David didn't say much, but the silence from his phone spoke volumes. He hadn't returned his mother's calls. The other relatives, cousins, aunts, even Thelma's church friends, they whispered too. I mean, Esme sounded sincere. Maybe Thelma is bitter. She's never liked Esme, right? You saw her face. She didn't even flinch when Esme collapsed. Thelma felt it. Not the shame of being wrong, but the cold sting of being misunderstood. She had spent her whole life teaching her children to tell the truth, and now the truth had a price, and the price was loneliness. They didn't say it to her face, but they didn't need to. The silence, the way Sarah avoided eye contact, the way David kept his voice low when talking to Esme. It all said one thing. She's jealous. She wants her son back. She's just a bitter old woman who can't stand not being in control. And that hurt more than any scream ever could. Thelma sat at the kitchen table that night, her tea gone cold, her phone lighting up with messages, not one of them from family. She wasn't a mother anymore. She wasn't a grandmother, not in their eyes, just a drama queen, a meddler, a destroyer of peace. And for what? For protecting a child who had no voice? For exposing a truth no one wanted to hear? I did the right thing, she whispered into the empty room. Didn't I? But the walls didn't answer, and neither did David. It was nearly midnight. Thelma was rinsing out her tea mug when she heard it, a knock. Not loud, not frantic, just steady. Knock, knock, knock. She wiped her hands, opened the door, and froze. There she was, a girl, no, a woman now, early 20s. Wearing a thrift store coat 2 sizes too big, hair pulled back like she was afraid to take up space, but her eyes unshakable. Are you Thelma Collins? I'm Madison. Not hello, not nice to meet you, just a quiet truth, straight to the point. the kind of truth that shakes the ground beneath your feet. Thelma didn't speak. She didn't breathe. Madison looked at her and said, "I heard what she did. I want answers." And in that moment, Thelma realized she wasn't alone anymore. Thelma poured her a cup of tea. Madison didn't touch it. She just sat at the edge of the couch, hands clasped, shoulders stiff, as if touching anything might make her break. "I used to pray for her," Madison said, her voice flat and quiet. "Every birthday, every Christmas, I'd leave a seat empty, just in case she came back." Thelma blinked back tears, but she never did. Madison reached into her worn-out purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, soft at the edges. She handed it to Thelma. "A death certificate for Esme Harris, issued when I was 15, Madison whispered. "They said she died in a car crash in Nevada, but I looked it up. No crash, no death, just a lie." Thelma stared at the paper. Her hands trembled. This wasn't just abandonment. This was erasure. A mother who didn't just walk away. She declared herself dead to her own daughter. Madison looked down, voice cracking for the first time. "I didn't just lose a mother. I lost the right to believe I was wanted." Thelma finally broke the silence. "You don't have to go through this, sweetheart. You don't owe anyone anything." But Madison shook her head slowly, firmly. "I'm not here for revenge. Not for money, not for drama." She looked straight into Thelma's eyes. "I just want to know why. Why did my mother erase me like I was nothing? Why did she file a death certificate and move on like I never existed?" Her voice didn't rise. She didn't cry. But that quiet was louder than any scream. "I spent years thinking I was cursed, broken, unlovable." She held up the death certificate with 2 fingers, like it was something rotting. "If she didn't want me, then why did she bring me into this world?" Thelma's hands trembled again. But she nodded. "Then we go together," she said softly, "to the family dinner this Sunday, and this time, everyone will hear the truth." The silence hung between them. Madison sat still, clutching the frayed edges of her coat. Thelma stared out the window. Outside, dusk was falling, but something inside her had already dawned. "Esme invited the whole family this Sunday," Thelma said, her voice low. "She wants to reclaim her image, pretend none of this ever happened." She turned to Madison, voice steady now. "But we'll be there too." Madison's eyes widened. "You sure?" Thelma stood up, walked to her bookshelf, pulled out a thick brown folder. Papers, photos, files, all neatly organized. "I've waited 15 years, she said, placing the folder on the table. "Let her speak. But this time, so will we." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just purpose, a quiet storm gathering strength. The dining room buzzed with low laughter and clinking glasses. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, throwing soft light across polished wood and wine-stained linens. Esme was radiant, laughing too loudly, holding her champagne like a trophy. That was until the room fell quiet. Thelma entered. Beside her, Madison. Esme froze mid-sip. Her smile faltered. "What? What is this?" Madison stepped forward, calm, measured. "You invited family tonight," she said. "I believe I qualify." Esme's hands trembled. "I don't know you." Madison placed a folder on the table, thick, worn, taped at the edges. She opened it slowly, 1 page at a time. 1. A notarized death certificate for Esme's own daughter. 2. A signed parental relinquishment form from 15 years ago. 3. Photos young Madison working nights in a diner, sleeping between library shelves. Gasps echoed. Elliot leaned forward. David turned pale. "You told the world I was dead," Madison said softly, eyes locked on Esme's. "Tonight, I came back to life." The room was frozen. except for Esme's breathing, ragged and fast. David sat frozen, his fork still halfway to his plate. His eyes locked on the documents. 15 years of silence now screamed across the mahogany table. Madison didn't look at him. She was done begging for recognition. But Elliot? He stood slowly, looking from Madison to the photos, then back to Esme. "You told me I was your only child," he whispered. "You lied." Esme's voice cracked. "I had no choice. She didn't belong with us. She was too different, too much trouble." Then she said it. "She wasn't my responsibility anymore." Gasps. Utter silence. David pushed his chair back. "Esme?" But he didn't finish, because Elliot spoke again. "She's my sister, not some mistake you buried." His voice was shaking, not with anger, but heartbreak. "And you," he turned to Esme, "you don't get to rewrite our family just because it was inconvenient." David stood. The room stilled around him. Even the servers stopped moving. He looked at Esme, not with rage, but disappointment so deep it hollowed the space between them. "I wanted to believe you," he said quietly, "even when Thelma warned me, even when Elliot started asking questions." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded document. "This is the prenup." "You remember Esme?" She blinked slowly, panic beginning to rise. "Clause 14, he continued. "Dishonesty that harms the family voids all claims to marital assets." He placed it gently on the table. "You forged a death certificate. You lied to your son. And you erased a human being." His voice didn't rise. "This is a marriage no longer bound by love, and now no longer bound by contract." Esme's hand shook. "David, please." He looked at Madison, then at Thelma. "I'm sorry I didn't see sooner." And with that, he walked out, leaving silence behind. And Esme, stripped of everything but the truth. The lights dimmed slightly in the ballroom. Elliot was gone. David was gone. Madison had walked out with quiet strength. And Esme, she sat alone in the same seat from which she had once laughed, ridiculed, and commanded attention. Now, no one looked her way. No one asked if she was okay. Even the servers had stopped offering wine at her table. The glow of the chandeliers no longer warmed her. They only illuminated what was missing. She reached for her phone. No new messages. Called Sarah. Voicemail. She looked across the room and saw Thelma, surrounded by the people Esme thought she had replaced. A grandmother, a father, a daughter, a grandson, whole without her. She had played every card and lost. She whispered to no one, "I did everything for this family." But there was no family left to hear her, just silence. The kind that lingers long after the music ends. Outside the venue, the night air was crisp. Madison walked alone under the soft glow of the street lamps, her heels echoing faintly on the pavement. She didn't cry. She had cried too much already in her life. This time, she simply let go. Then, "Madison!" She turned. Elliot was jogging toward her, suit jacket flapping, eyes full of something between guilt and hope. He stopped a few feet away, breathless. "I didn't know," he said. "No one told me." Madison gave a tired smile. "It's okay. You weren't supposed to." There was silence. Not awkward, just heavy. Then Elliot did something she didn't expect. He reached out and hugged her, tightly, without hesitation, and he whispered, "Not half-sister, just sister." That broke something in her, something old and cold. She hugged him back harder. "Just brother," she whispered. A few weeks later, a quiet Sunday afternoon settled over Thelma's kitchen. The table was full, but not loud. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and something more important space. One extra plate, one new seat. David handed Madison a thin envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside was a certified letter and a check. "For school," he said before she could ask. "Not charity, not guilt, just responsibility." Madison stared at the paper. "You don't have to do this." David shook his head. "I do, because someone should have, a long time ago." Thelma reached over and squeezed her hand. Elliot brought her a glass of water and nudged her shoulder like they'd always been siblings. They didn't talk about Esme, not because it was forbidden, but because it was finished. Later that evening, David loaded Madison's last box into the trunk of her small car. She was moving closer, a few blocks away. "You sure you'll be okay alone?" he asked. She smiled. "I won't really be alone anymore, will I?" He looked at her, not as a stranger, not as an obligation, but as his daughter. "No," he said, "not anymore." Thelma didn't want an apology, not from the family who doubted her, not from Esme. What she wanted was this: a table where everyone sat without secrets, a home where no child was forgotten, a family that didn't flinch when someone said, "Madison." That night, she stood by the kitchen sink drying dishes. The radio played old jazz, the kind her husband used to love. Elliot walked in with Madison laughing about something on her phone. David followed, tossing his keys into the ceramic bowl like always. No one said, "We were wrong," but their presence, their warmth, their return said everything. "Grandma," Elliot said, pausing mid-laugh, "you were right, even when we didn't see it." Thelma smiled, but didn't turn around. "I didn't need to be right," she said softly. "I just needed you to see the truth." And finally, they did. Not the truth in courtrooms or on screens, but the kind you feel when people stay, when arms are open, when trust is earned again. That night, Thelma sat at the table with her son, her grandson, and the girl the world tried to erase. She didn't win a war, she won back her family. The table was simple: no chandeliers, no speeches, no masks, just roast chicken, homemade gravy, and soft jazz from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. Madison passed the rolls. Elliot teased her about the way she used too much butter. David laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. And Thelma, she didn't say much, but she didn't need to, because everything was where it belonged again. They didn't talk about Esme. Not out of bitterness, but because there was nothing left to say. No one needed to explain anymore. The truth had spoken. And in the last glow of sunlight touching the window pane, Thelma looked around her table, her family. Complete. And the final words came not from anger, but peace. Esme tried to erase Madison to protect her perfect life. But the truth, it didn't just survive. It came home. In a world where appearances are polished and stories are edited to perfection, sometimes the ugliest truths are the ones that set us free. This story reminds us that silence can wound just as deeply as betrayal, that truth doesn't always arrive loudly, but it arrives when we need it most. That sometimes justice isn't about revenge, but about finally being seen. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to stand your ground, even if it means standing alone, because one day the right people will see you for who you truly are. The truth doesn't die in the dark. It waits, and it returns home. If this story moved you, if you saw a piece of yourself in Thelma Madison or even Elliot, then don't scroll away just yet. Subscribe to Through Her Eyes. Because every week, we share stories that cut deeper than drama. Stories that heal, awaken, and remind us you're not alone. Leave a comment. Hit like if you believe truth matters, even when it's hard to face. Your voice matters. And here, we listen.